Well, good morning and or good afternoon. Welcome or welcome back. As I often say, thank you very much for your time. My name is Dalibor Petrovic, and I have a distinct pleasure of being the host for our live webcast series of conversations we've been organizing and delivering under the Deloitte Canada umbrella for the last couple of years now. For those of you returning, you will know that we are using this channel to bring you conversations with both tech leaders who are shaping the future of Canada, but we are also using this channel to showcase what we believe are timely and relevant tech conversations. This particular session is one of those sessions. It's our fifth deep dive as part of our formal launch of Deloitte Tech Trends 2023. And I'm thrilled to be joined today by three of my colleagues and friends. Mike Bechtel, whom many of you already know. Mike Bechtel has the coolest title in all of Deloitte world. He is our global chief futurist and the key author and editor and thought leader behind our tech trends. Mike, thank you very much for coming back for this episode. Also today, we are joined by Wedny Henry, and Wedny is our intergalactic leader of Deloitte's blockchain and digital assets. I am thrilled to welcome you, Wedny. You're joining us. So actually we have Mike, you are in Los Angeles today, and Wedny, I know you're in Washington, DC. Thank you for joining us from Washington. And then from Toronto, I'm thrilled to also welcome Charles Deng, who is essentially Wendy's equivalent for Canada. So Charles leads Deloitte Canada's payments and digital assets practice. So thank you all very much for joining us. For our audience, as you would know, this is a live session, so please excuse any technical challenges we might still face. The session is going to be about an hour long, and we absolutely would love to encourage you to submit your questions. So using the Q&A function of this platform, please submit any questions that you might have for our guests, and we will do our best to address them all. Now, how are we going to run this particular session is we're going to start with a bit of a reflection and context on the tech trends in general. And then we are going to then do a deeper dive into this particular trend of today. The trend that we refer to is "In Us We Trust." So with that, Mike, I would like to pass the baton over to you to sort of give us, tell us the story, and then we're going to do a deep dive.
Absolutely. Well, Dalibor, thank you for your continued partnership and in leadership and in this Tech Trends virtual roadshow. And thanks to your whole Canadian practice for helping support us in getting this word out. And this is a particularly fun part of the word, as it were. The last 2 weeks, I've been blessed and burdened by quite a bit of travel. I was at South by Southwest last week, where we were sharing our perspectives on the future of technology. And then this week, I'm at Peter Diamandis's Abundance 360 conference here in LA. And I have to tell you, the degree to which folks are finding and meaningfully engaging around some of these terms that 3 or 4 years ago felt maybe a little overhyped. Mm-hmm. They're really starting to make themselves manifest in ways that are merely very useful. Yeah. In ways that are actually leading with need and driven by business utility as opposed to bling or shiny tech, right? And so as we talk this week, as Dalibor said, week 5 or session 5 about "In Us We Trust," a lot of what we're going to be talking about today involves the B word, right? I call it the B word, blockchain, because sometimes if we're being honest, right, blockchain feels like it's had a bit of an image problem, right? A bit of a historical, people raise their eyebrow, oh, that thing. Yeah, that thing. But not in the spirit of get rich quick strategies, right? And not in the spirit of hammers looking for nails, but in the spirit of delivering truth and trust across organizational boundaries. Now, that said, context. Flyby, because most of you, I'm sure, have heard versions of this 5 times already. But Deloitte Tech Trends is our annual chronicle of what's new and next in tech, right? We're in the business of sensing and making sense of technology emergence that lends itself towards business utility. Or in the plainest possible English, we try to see all of the things that are possible and distill out those which look to be profitable for leaders like yourselves over the next 18 to 24 months. Now, how do we do that, right? How do we treasure hunt for signal in the noise, right? How do we inoculate ourselves and you against snake oil? Well, a big part of our research anchors around this idea that just about everything worth its weight in technology emergence over the last, not just 5 years, but 50 years, heck, 150 years, have been stories of evolution, right, not revolution, over these 3 rows, right? Simpler ways of interacting with technology, right? Simple always wins. Smarter means of extracting information and insights, right, out of data systems, right? Smarter always wins. And then more capable, more powerful, more abundant ways, pure coincidence on, abundance this week, but more capable and powerful ways of crunching the numbers that power the party, right? Power always wins. And so with that in mind, we can meaningfully look ahead at the subset of technologies that are emerging and say, hey, things like extended virtual and unlimited reality make interfaces simpler. And so, right, that dog can hunt, right? That investment space has legs, right? Information systems that power new forms of intelligence like generative AI, exponential AI, that too smells like profitability. And then over on the right, okay, decentralized platforms, right? Moving from miniaturization to virtualization and now to decentralization as a means of recognizing that none of us is as capable, right, as performant, and as we'll talk about, as trustworthy as all of us. Now, if y'all were running startups, maybe some of you are, in which case, congratulations, been there. That's all you might need, because leaders need to pioneer, right? Move fast and break things. By all means, move fast and break things. But as stewards of large household name organizations, most of us also need to make sure that we protect what we have today as we pursue what we want to have tomorrow, right? That rather than move fast and break things, right, you move far, right? And you make things, constructive innovation. And so these 3 green buckets, right, these are the guardian forces that ensure that we don't mess up today's business in pursuit of tomorrow's dreams. Now, interestingly, our tech trends over the last 15 years have really been stories that lend themselves, each and every one, to these 6 buckets, right? The stories which we sussed out from first principles, client case studies, right? Real crunch. These have shown us the buckets that matter most. And now we've gone ahead and said, okay, knowing that, let's look for stories in these 6 buckets, right? These 6 macro technology forces. Cool. Well,
I was going to say, as you just, so Mike, as you just, on this one, the more I stare at these 6 buckets, and I actually heard a couple of people comment on this already, so I think we are on the same sort of trajectory. These 6 constitute a very, very elegant way to think about the overall tech strategy in an organization. I know that like previously there was this mantra of people, process, and technology as what people considered as they were thinking of their tech strategy. But what this does is that I think now expands that theme into something modern, new, different, and as you say, very, very relevant. The 3 buckets in the bottom, like business of technologies, core stuff, cyber and trust, and core modernization which is going to always be relevant, because what we are doing today is going to be legacy for someone else tomorrow.
Yeah, right.
And those three on the top, interaction, information, and computation, that is actually a wonderful, elegant framework to think about developing overarching tech strategy for an enterprise. So just wanted to sort of highlight that for our audience members to think through that as well, because it could be very, very useful. Sorry.
No, Dalibor, and
to you.
This is why we beats me, and in us we trust.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you, you're spot on. You're spot on. The reason we spend so much energy and oxygen belaboring the history of IT in an emerging technology futures session is because there's an unhealthy tendency to receive novel technology as an a la carte blizzard of buzzwords.
Yeah.
Right? Randomness everywhere, all the time, all at once. Right. I think I just butchered that movie name. But but the point is this. This framework, A, you said it great, right? It's a means of managing one's technology practice and strategy.
Yeah.
But B, it's also a means of separating signal from noise, of saying, if it's not one of these six, I'm not sure it matters, or at least I'm not sure that it's a need to have.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I'm with you, sir. Now, here's the scoop. We talked this year in our cyber and trust force, right? In the do no harm bucket, any given year about cyber, risk, or trust. And for the prior 2 years, Tech Trends went all in on cyber, right? We chronicled zero trust postures 2 years ago, term christened by Palo Alto Networks, the idea being that we can't just put moats around castles anymore. We need to lock every square meter of the enterprise because place matters less. And it's not if the baddies get in, it's when. And when they do, you lock them to 1 square meter. Great. Then last year, we talked about cyber AI, the idea that we need robot reinforcements in a world where baddies are outpacing good folks by an order of magnitude. Great. This year, it's not a cyber story, it's a trust story. Mm. And specifically, the reason we call this chapter and this trend In Us We Trust is when we started our research this past year, we were greeted with a torrent of really acrimonious negative headlines around things like faith in institutions is approaching an all-time low. Yeah. And then you'd read about it and people would say, yeah, people are losing faith in governments, government agencies worldwide, and businesses, and startups, and each other. People saying things like, I can't believe my own eyes anymore. How come? Well, alternate facts, deep fakes, Gen AI, this feeling that we don't know who to trust. Well, what we started to recognize was that through that lens, through that sort of admittedly, despairing lens, that blockchain and triple ledger technologies and their affiliates, and Wendy, Wendy and Charles will give us a masterclass here on the breadth of this capability set. But that a lot of these tools, which had up until recently shown up as interesting hammers looking for nails, right? As, hey, blockchain, have you heard of it? Want to do a pilot prototype? That in fact, they serve as elegant frameworks to deliver truth in a post-trust world. That in fact, when the challenge is that you don't trust me, I don't trust you, it's that scene, if you remember, folks, right, the movie, I think Reservoir Dogs, right, where they're all standing there holding a gun at each other, right? Yep. The answer isn't trust one of them. The answer is trust all of them, AKA none of us is as trustworthy as all of us, AKA cryptographic truth. Okay, blockchain-based trust is a means of managing master data across organizational boundaries. Blockchain-based tech is a as a means of delivering business process reengineering across organizational boundaries. The idea is, in the past, right, this would be a joint venture, an acquisition, a reverse acquisition, an alliance, a consortium, right, a standards body. And anybody who's worked through that, right, anybody who's got that scar tissue knows, like, yeah, somebody always plays alpha, somebody plays beta. In this world, we're able to say, no. We're going to trust the math. And so how does this show up? I'll give you two really brief case studies. And then we're going to hand things mercifully over to my colleagues, Wendy and Charles, because the idea is this stuff is already here. This isn't Futurama. This is starting to show up in organizations you've heard of and that matter. For example, we talked to the state of New York. Right? The state of New York was facing the same problem a lot of municipal, state, province, and national governments were facing, namely, we need a COVID vaccine health credential, right? Something we can trust, right? As a means of showing that somebody, in fact, got vaxxed. Well, while I know we're here in virtual Canada today, you know, I'm sure you're well aware of the fracas that we experience here down in the States around, well, who's going to own that data, right? Is it the pharmacy, the doctor, the state, the city, the person? Right? Back to Reservoir Dogs. And so, blockchain, a blockchain-based system that records on-chain who's who, right? And who's got which vax. The thought being, again, in this instance, nobody has to play ringleader. The public cryptographic chain plays system of truth. Now, in the case of the Japan International Cooperation Agency, or JICA, their issue was totally different. They said, listen, we're a social impact group focused on stamping out, you know, child labor, on driving for human rights. And the production of cocoa, right? The production of chocolate, the production of the you know, sweets and coffee, the whole 9 yards, tragically involves a awful level of child labor. And in the past, right, the way of stamping that out would be to say, hey, y'all using kids? And people would say, nope. Are you supposed to trust them? No. And so by introducing a public-based blockchain ledger, they were able to say at every step in the supply chain, certified we did not, certified we did not, right? And with this idea of transitive trust all the way up the supply chain, they were able to show provenance, right, that was human rights managed, right, that was child labor free. And so stories last year talking to a Hong Kong jeweler that realized that blockchain-based trust made for the new school of 21st century gem appraisals, right? Cold supply chain stories where you can prove that fish was never, you know, warmed up, refrozen, and warmed up again. These are stories where, again, we're not trusting you, you're not trusting me, we're trusting us. And so with that exposition, I'm delighted to hand it over to my friends and colleagues, Wendy and Charles, to keep me honest, set me straight, and drive the truth and trust in what's really going on in all the stories you're helping deliver and that you're seeing around the world.
Thanks, Mike. And thanks, Dalibor, for your intro as well. And thrilled to be here today with you all, because I love nothing better than to chat about blockchain. I've been at this since around 2013. So I've been on this journey for quite a while. And to watch this technology, one, develop, two, to watch the ups and downs in the excitement over it, and then the disillusion over, you know, how it really works, has been an incredible journey. And, you know, as I say, we're all on the learning journey for what this will be as it continues to mature. But as Mike said, it is here and it is being used across just a wide breadth of use cases. And we see more and more of those every single day. But just let's take a step back and just ground ourselves in some of the sort of basic tenets.
Yeah.
You know, what is blockchain? It's really at its core a decentralized distributed ledger that provides a single source of the truth. And I should add, that's a trusted single source of the truth. But back to what Mike was really talking about at the onset of his talk was, it's comprised of technologies that have been around for a very long time, right? There is no new whiz, technology that is part and parcel of what a blockchain is. It's just the way existing technologies were brought forward and put together. So it's cryptography, it's a distributed ledger, and it's something we call a consensus mechanism, but really what it is solving a mathematical puzzle, right? And those were wedded together to create what we know as blockchain. That's the technology. But as with every technology, what you really have to do is start with the business problem or the opportunity. And so you also have to think about, how do I know if I should be having a blockchain conversation? Because I can tell you, you do not want to use blockchain if there's another technology that makes more sense. Blockchain solves problems we haven't been able to solve in the past. It creates new business models that didn't exist. But for the ones that, for the business problems where current technology meets the need, that should be the go-to. So I think that goes to another comment Mike made of, it should not be the hammer that's out there looking for the nail. And that's why I highly encourage you all to start with, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And then what's the opportunity? Okay, so good. I'm starting with my business problem. I think I have an opportunity. How do I know, right, if I should be looking at blockchain?
Yeah.
So you want to basically, blockchain works best when there's a need for shared data. And usually it's shared data outside your four walls, because blockchain's not a party of one. It's not even generally a party of two. It's more a community problem. So a party of 2, 4, 100, 5,000. And so there needs to be a need for shared data, and there needs to be a need for trust that data and the transaction involved with that data is needed in a trusted manner. Finally, do you have a need for accountability and auditability? Because there's a facet to blockchain, which is blockchain is a write once, read many. In other words, it's immutable. Once it is committed to the blockchain, right, which it's done through consensus. In other words, people agree to the rules of the road, and then they say that's a valid transaction and it's written to the blockchain. It's almost like the old-fashioned accounting ledgers back at the beginning of time of the accounting ledgers. You need an offset transaction. You can't erase the original transaction. So if you need auditability and accountability, it's awesome, right? Because it's built in. Now, you can get exponential. So if you say that, right, there's a need for shared data, I need trust, and I need accountability and auditability, you should probably be having a blockchain conversation. You can get exponential value out of the use of blockchain if it's a blockchain characteristically needed problem or opportunity. If there are third parties today involved in your process flow needed for trust, right? So you can think of that as a Visa or a MasterCard right now, right? They're a trusted third party that facilitates a transaction. And you can trust that the person that you're going to pay the money is going to recognize the fact that you have, and they're going to give you the goods and services, right? And you can trust that they are going to insert themselves should there be a dispute. Because all of this is done on a shared ledger that everybody has visibility into, you now don't need that third party, because that trust is embedded into the transaction being registered on to the blockchain. There's another convention that you can get exponential value out of. We call them smart contracts. They're not smart and they're not contracts, but they are pieces of code that are put on the chain. And so that code is on the chain. It executes given some event, and it's trusted because everyone can see the code. Everybody knows that the code, remember, it's a write one, read many, so the code can't be changed. And so they can expect that the outcome is going to be what the outcome is going to be. So you can see that there's these constructs in this blockchain that truly do create a trust layer into whatever process you're building onto this blockchain. And so I wanted to just bring sort of those basic concepts to the forefront as we talk about this. So you're really understanding sort of what are some of the core tenets. Charles, did I miss anything?
No, thanks, Wendy. That was a great overview. And just to recap to everyone here, I'm part of our financial services consulting practice here in Canada with a focus on payments and also leading our digital assets team within the firm. The only thing I'd add to what you had just mentioned, Wendy, and by the way, great overview, but it's at the center of decentralized architectures, the next frontier and iteration of the web. Whatever you envision it to be, digital assets wallets will be one of the next key battlegrounds. And you can start to see this unfolding in the marketplace, both from a custodial and non-custodial standpoint. Wallets act as a proxy and entry point into the space and will ultimately have to tie in and integrate with different blockchains and DLT sources as the industry starts to enable the key use cases that we'll cover off here today.
And you mentioned a couple of things already now. You first of all, Wendy, great overview actually on blockchain and its use cases in general and what it is. You mentioned Web 3.0, you mentioned digital assets. Could we do just a quick sort of overview of what you mean when you use those terms, digital assets and Web 3.0?
Sure. Charles, did you want to take digital assets? You want me to take that?
Sure, I can take digital assets. So to me, digital assets is like the umbrella term of all the different concepts and tokens that we've been referring to in this space. So underneath digital assets sits cryptocurrencies, stable coins, which are a unique slice of cryptocurrencies that are used to bring stability, being pegged to one against or one-to-many against either fiat currencies, commodities, other cryptocurrencies. They're also used to on-ramp and off-ramp. And then there's NFTs, non-fungible tokens that are used for collectibles and or unique assets that can be traded, stored. And then there's also all other digital assets called central bank digital currencies, which are electronic and programmable forms of money that are issued by central banks.
And would a digital ID also be considered a digital asset?
Yeah, that's enabled by non-fungible tokens.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you. And Web 3.0, Wendy, what do we mean when we say Web 3.0? How is it different from the web in which we are immersed today?
Yeah, and it's an interesting thing because I think it's been one of the latest buzzwords of Web 3. And I think it's in the run up to the metaverse, which is the other new and emerging hype cycle. But so Web 3, I mean, the difference between Web 2 and Web 3 really gets to the core of decentralization, right? Your Web 2, it started with us being able to put out data and in a static form. We were able to see that data. We were able to search that data, but it still was very centralized, right? It was very centralized on different sites and owned by people. You could comment on it, but you didn't really have control over it. It could be taken down. So it still is, right? The Web 2 world, we engage, but we engage in a way that it's controlled for us. Mm-hmm. When we talk about Web 3, it's going to flip to we are going to control it, right? To some of what Mike said, there's trust. There's not trust just in us, it's trust in all of us. Mm-hmm. And we take back ownership of the interactions and the data that we are sharing in a Web 3 world. And that's really the difference. And that's due to this decentralization. And that gets to the core of the identity issue and why this Web 3 world, in a Web 2 world, it's important to have identity. In a Web 3 world, it can't happen without identity. Because it's going to be what's often called creator or content creator centralized. So, Mike, you're really good at explaining this as well.
No, I mean, No, Wendy, I mean, everything that you shared, I'm picking up what you're putting down and agree 100%. And, you know, we spoke last year with our tech trends research. We spoke with a jeweler out of Hong Kong, and he said, and this story just always, it always helped me with the abstraction here. He said, listen, 20 years ago, they had a Web 1.0 approach to proving their gems authenticity. And I said, what was that? And he said, well, we had an About Us tab on the website. I said, huh? And he said, yeah, you know, because Web 1.0 was what you say about yourself, right? You know, our long tradition of hand-cut gems, blah, 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 trust us.
Yeah.
And he said 10 years ago, Web 2, 10 years ago, they realized that the internet was about what other people said about you, right? And so, you know, Facebook reviews, Foursquare reviews, Google reviews, you name it, Yelp. And to Wendy's excellent point, all those individual truths were owned by those companies I just named, right? Mm-hmm. So it was real insofar it was brought to you by a large organization. Mm. Yeah. Their Web3 approach was to certify the color, cut, clarity, carat of each stone on a public Ethereum blockchain, co-signed by the GIA. Why? Because per Wendy's excellent point, they own that identity insofar as it's there, it's in the blockchain, right? Like you can't take the spilled drink out of the swimming pool, right? Like no company is going to shut that review down because it belongs to the public blockchain. It belongs to quote unquote us. And so it's that idea of identity beyond any one organization's ownership and control of that row and column.
Yeah, and to that, right, I think the word that you all are probably hearing more often than the others is identity. Yeah. And to the point, you know, I just made a second ago, as we move forward on this journey, identity becomes more and more important, and it really is the Holy Grail. Having said that, I will tell you that in this world, we've been, you know, moving on the journey of the blockchain for over 10 years now. And in this world, we have been unable to crack this nut just yet. I think we're getting closer. Standards are coming along. We're starting to see that development, but it's not just technology that's important here, right? It's also the standards, it's acceptance by governments, it's acceptance by individuals of what they're willing to have as an identity. But also, you know, if you think about it, you also have the complications of there are things called keys, right? We've talked about how the blockchain is cryptographically secured. Mm-hmm. And so an identity in a blockchain world becomes a bit more complex because it's not just a user ID and a password. There's also a concept we call self-sovereign identity, which means, once again, we said this is going to be decentralized and distributed, and we're going to own our own identities, which means we're going to hold these cryptographic keys. Now, what does that mean? Well, that means that it becomes more important that individuals know how to handle their identity. And that's why this is so hard.
Right.
Because right away, you think, well, there are individuals that can't hold their identity. Right. So there are complexities to this. Mike, go ahead.
No, Wendy, I'm just thinking of the number of friends I have who've lost a Word document before a test, or you know, their hard drive crashed and they lost their family photos, and so say take that same mojo and apply it to a couple $100,000 of digital assets. You're like, and so the standard for adulting is non-trivial. Yeah. And even little L libertarians would love to have help and backups when they're facing that foxhole crisis, right? Yeah.
So Dalibor, did you have a question or comment?
Well, there is actually an interesting question that's coming from the audience. We're talking about decentralization, of course, and we are talking about decentralization as enabled through these technologies, but it's something that is going to be with us now in a permanent fashion. Like, this is where things are heading. The question actually comes and says, well, there seems to be a pendulum that goes from centralized, decentralized. Centralized was mainframe, then client server, decentralized, and cloud was kind of viewed maybe as a way to centralize things under an external provider. Then the edge computing introduces this centralization component. So thoughts on the question was, reflections on that pendulum swinging, and specifically, is the hybrid always the right answer? So how would you respond to that?
So I think the hybrid will continue to exist. And it comes down to, once again, where do you need that decentralization, right? We've had distributed computing, but it was centralized, right? So we moved the compute into different physical locations on different physical machines, but they were controlled by a central entity, right? Mm-hmm. Usually a company, a government. Individuals didn't generally implement distributed computing, right? And so we can think of that in some ways as distributed versus decentralized. When we talk about decentralization, we talk about now not only distributed by its very nature because it's decentralized, which means not one single entity owns it, right? Now we have multiple entities that are coming together in an ecosystem or a consortium to facilitate some kind of commerce, some kind of transaction, some kind of trusted sharing, but they all have a copy of the system under their control. Whether that's in a cloud, it'll be in a different component of the cloud, or it's, I would never advocate for it being on-prem because it is peer-to-peer, right? So why tunnel in? But it's going to be under the control of different entities, and therefore it's decentralized. Now, blockchain's not going to take over the world, and it's rarely a solution unto itself, right? I call it an and technology, because today we talk about blockchain. Back in the day, and I'm going to age myself horribly here, but I was part of whether we went with TCP/IP or DCE, right? And awesome. We went with TCP/IP, and we talked about it in those days. Today, nobody talks about TCP/IP. We right. Type in google.com or DoorDash.com, right? The fact of the matter is that's running on a technology that was very transformative. It created the internet. And so now we have blockchain, and blockchain is going to bring the ability to have this decentralization and distributed compute, but it's going to live alongside regular centralized compute and legacy systems and everything else that we have today. It's just going to, think about the confluence of AI, IoT, and blockchain. Where would that make sense? Well, think about autonomous cars. Autonomous cars are not going to work without some type of distributed ledger and trust anchor, because you got to know that the data coming from that device that's going to change your lane is actually coming from that device. And you need to know that that data was generated by that device, right? So it's just providing sort of technology that allows other technologies and transactions to happen in that very trusted and secure manner.
Wendy, I for one you might call it dating yourself, but I'm swooning at the TCP/IP reference, because it's perfect. You're right. At the time it was the thing, and now it's the plumbing that allows the better thing.
And blockchain will be there. And just, yes, blockchain will be there.
I love it.
I was really, it was really lovely to hear some of the stories that Mike, you shared, user stories, because like in those 2 or 3 examples, we have an example of blockchain being used for trust in a context of physical product, which was the diamonds, then and the cocoa beans, and then in the context of digital product, which is around the individuals owning their information about vaccinations. So I like the fact that it was multiple different industries represented. I wonder, Charles, if we have any interesting use cases in Canada where you've seen Canadian organizations solving business problems using these technologies.
Yeah, so focusing on the digital identities and credentials topic for a second, there's been a lot of discussion around this topic in Canada and beyond, considering the continuing shift towards digitalization, along with just the existing limitations and pain points associated with physical credentials, and just generally, static information not reflecting the true dynamic nature of our collective identities. It's important to note that digital identity doesn't necessarily have to equal decentralized identity, although there's a few guiding principles that do come to mind when thinking about enabling digital ID through decentralized architecture. So it's about giving users greater control over their data. It's about enabling more purposeful models and methods for proving identity, whereby individuals only share the required data and information that they want to or they need. It's about enabling consumers along with validators of identity to just more reliably trust authentication provided by third parties, be it digital wallets or identity providers. So once we have these reliable implementations, infrastructure, and processes in place to support digital identities, we can start to then integrate all these sources and attach corresponding credentials about the identity holder. And some examples include university degrees, professional certifications, security clearances, and the list goes on. For the most part, I would say that the technology is largely there. The bigger lift is around driving adoption and ubiquity on this new paradigm shift and approach to enable digital ID and credentials.
There was an interesting, sorry, Dalibor, go ahead, bud.
No, I'm going to pass it on to you.
No, Charles, to your point, there was couple of interesting questions here in the Q&A. Somebody says they find it ironic that one of the main benefits to this suite of technology being so popular is the same reason there's hesitancy to adopt it, kind of the decentralization and risk of losing. And, I typed this answer, but I didn't know if folks could see it, that, one of the paradoxes, maybe irony is the better word. I'd have to ask Alanis Morissette. Sorry, local artist, right? Canadian. Whether this is ironic or not, but I work a lot at the intersection between the enterprise and the startup community. Right. And what I find is the startup community is enthusiastic, or maybe relatively more enthusiastic here and pioneering here, because they're little guys, pardon the gendered word, my Midwest is showing, but they're littler, they have less to lose. And so they see this suite of technologies as a way to break into new places and spaces. Enterprise clients, right? I had a client literally look at me, Wendy, I'm sure you've experienced in Charles versions of this, where somebody looked at me like, this disintermediation, does this suggest I'm an intermediator? And it's like, yes, because if you're a big, right, you're already in, and you sometimes feel like you have a lot to lose. And so the household name organizations who could most help promote this replatforming are sometimes the least incented to do so. And so you just kind of end up with this interesting dance between sort of big and little. And I just think it is, to your question, Khalid, ironic and interesting.
Wendy, over to you. I would be curious to sort of get your thoughts. Another question that came up is, so you said the technology exists. Technology is not new. What is new is the application of it to solve the trust problem. The question that came through was, how do you drive the awareness, adoption, and the right behaviors? I'm going to assume within organizations, or perhaps even more broadly within society. Have you seen, what would be examples of organizations doing this well? And maybe examples of organizations who are struggling, why they struggle, and what would you suggest they do differently?
Yeah, so that's an awesome question, because I often get asked, if it's so obvious that this technology is transformative, why has the adoption been so slow? And
Yeah.
you know, my first answer to that question, people kind of scratch their heads because I come at this from a technology. I've been a career-long hands-on technologist. So I say because the technology is the easy part, right? As I said, these technologies are not that new, number one. Number two, as I said, you know, it's an infrastructure layer. So it's you're building at the base and then putting something on top of. But what is very, very different about this is the new business model that is really invoked. And so we've talked about, you know, it's not a party of one, it's not a party of two. So you get this ecosystem. But if you look at some of the most notable examples, and I'm sure many of you heard about Maersk, right? So Maersk tried to solve the problem of the latency and manual inputs and a lot of the disputes that arose just in the supply chain for shipping. And they and IBM built this really robust system on the blockchain, had multiple entities involved in it, but it had a hard time getting off the ground beyond that core group of participants. And so you say, well, why is that? Well, it comes down in some respects to this trust facet, because you've got people in a supply chain who in many ways are competitors. Like the first ones aren't competitors because they're logically in line, right, in the process. But now you want more people to come in. Well, they could be shipping people, they could be port workers, they could be all these different entities that are now competitors with the ones that are already in this supply chain flow. And so then you get into, well, what's the governance structure? How are they onboarded? Who's paying for what, right? What's the cost of coming on board? In other words, what are all the governance rules around doing this blockchain? You've got to think about, you know, the overarching governance of the entity or the blockchain. You have to think about, you know, how are you going to make sure that people are keeping their technology up? Do they have the right skill sets? By its very nature, right? Blockchain knows no geographical boundaries. So what regulations are applicable and how do you make sure that everybody's applying by the regulations they need to? And what do you do when there's no regulatory clarity, right? How do you operate? So there's much harder problems than the technology. And that's what everybody, you know, now we're getting standards that's starting to help. We're trying very hard and we're seeing, you know, EMEA came out with MICA. We're seeing many more regulations start to hit and some regulatory clarity. I would say the US is probably lagging as we continue to even try and figure out who's supposed to regulate this. But we're starting to see different reusable business models. In other words, creating new business entities, which VACT, V-A-K-T, is a good one. It's an energy trading one where they actually created a brand new company that then other companies can contribute to, and its role is less tied to any one of the companies. So we're starting to see those things work out, but that really is the biggest stumbling block. It is not the technology.
I think there's an importance to shift the perception of the space away from speculative assets to focus more on the technology and the utility. And I was involved with a proof of concept with one of the big 5 banks back in the 2015-2016 timeframe, where we were trying to enable this within the bank. And I think ultimately we couldn't find a use case scenario at the time. But I do think that in order to enable this en masse, we need to look at the industry and we need to look at the specific use cases. Sometimes these intermediaries have a specific role and function, and they exist for a reason. So although it's very easy to say, well, you're just going to disintermediate everything, I think there's a specific context that we also need to keep in mind. There's a Canadian specific example around a blockchain-based payment solution that's worth calling out, where this is actually done in market and in practice, and that's with Walmart Canada. They implemented a blockchain solution back in early 2021 called DL Freight. And this was an automated system for managing payments disputes and the way that the companies make and manage invoices to and from its 70 or so freight carriers. And so, the overall solution was able to reduce the dispute rate from 70%, which you can imagine is horrific to try and manage, down to 1%, given the need to orchestrate and choreograph, all the data across the different parties and systems involved. Given the size and network of Walmart, like the blockchain implementation was effectively the best solution that they gravitated towards. So actually a great example of an in-market solution, not a proof of concept, but something that's been deployed.
Yeah, Walmart's been very, very active in this space. Got kudos to them.
Yeah. So we touched on a number of different digital assets, including crypto, and you spoke about use cases. You mentioned earlier the NFTs, the non-fungible tokens. Can you just maybe give our audience a little bit of a one-on-one of what that is, how that is used, and in case we know of any non-collectible use cases of that, I'll be just curious to know.
Yeah.
Wendy.
Yeah, so there are two types of tokens on the blockchain: fungible and non-fungible. Fungible work just like US dollars. It doesn't matter which one you have, they're completely interchangeable. And non-fungible, they are unique. In other words, you can't say this is the same as that. They are distinct from one another. So non-fungible tokens have been around for a while, but lately what everybody hears about are these collectibles, which actually have been around for a little bit too. I actually bought a Lamborghini. I want to say it was probably around 2015 or 2016. It hasn't appreciated in value. I always buy the ones that don't actually turn out to be, $1 million.
That's the conservation of baseball
egg,
card law. Yes.
I didn't buy a Bored Ape. I should have. But nevertheless, we started to see a lot of these NFTs from a collectible standpoint, which is great. It opened up a large world of art to a lot of people and different things. But at its very core, it is really just a coding, a coding mechanism, right? And so the other places that NFTs are used is to really create a unique instance on the blockchain of something of value or something that gives you a right. So we're starting to see a large use of NFTs in the use of loyalty programs. We're seeing NFTs being used to engage customers in very, very different ways, where they can provide a feedback loop to different aspects of the company or different new products or those kinds of things. It can enable them to engage with the company in a very different way. We are seeing them used in government to, we actually built a very large system for a US agency around grant management, where we tokenized the grant. And we were able to demonstrate that we took away cash management at the various layers, because now we could definitively say that the end-tier recipient of the grant had done what they needed to do, and therefore they could be paid directly instead of giving it to all the interim recipients. So anything that's distinctive value, think of that, where car titles are starting to be issued as NFTs, hunting licenses. Those are all instances of where NFTs. Charles, do you have others?
Yeah, there's just one more, I think, use case, which is around new models of ownership and how we can end up representing ownership or stake or voting rights within an organization. I think when you look back at some of the headlines that have happened back in Toronto, we've seen a lot of incidents over the past, over the past 6 months or 12 months around homeowners basically going on vacation and then having their homes effectively sold, without their awareness, which, if you think about it, is absolutely crazy. And these incidents, I think, highlight the inefficiencies in how deeds are managed today. And this stems from, a lack of transparency and or siloed information and data. There is a real opportunity here for a solution, and whether based on blockchain or not, but in my viewpoint, blockchain could be a great example or proof point here, that would serve as a universal source of truth while preserving privacy to the extent possible. The goal here is to facilitate a more open, accurate, and trustworthy set of records, and ultimately, to reduce information asymmetry and limit the opportunities for fraudsters.
Yeah, this is excellent. Like those are really, really excellent examples. Thank you. Yeah,
a long way, and all. I mean, not just the diversity of them all, but the distance from, as you said, Dalibor, beyond collectibles.
Yeah,
I think so often when we see something new, we affiliate it with its first use case.
well, exactly. Like the cryptocurrency, the cryptocurrency's original use, as you so eloquently say, dark web,
dark actors in the dark web, dark stuff,
that stuck, right? That perception has stuck. So yeah.
Well, and with augmented virtual and unlimited reality, the amount of oxygen that I burn helping boards understand that it's more than Beat Saber.
Yeah, that's right.
Because again, we affiliate the use case that we see, but as these things move from tech to toy to tool, or in the case of blockchain, I think tech to endless hammer looking for nail prototypes to tool. There's real utility.
Yeah, I want to be this was really, really good, really insightful conversation. It brought this concept that we all heard of into some real use cases that I hope that our audience could be inspired to think about the applicability to their circumstances. I'm sure, of course, I'm going to guess, but I'm going to pretty certain the answer is yes, that if anyone who is listening in has a question or would like to discuss an idea or a potential use case, you guys are the people to connect with. Charles in Canada and Wendy internationally, right? That we will have capability to help clients go through their particular problem to derive to whether or not blockchain might be a solution, right? And the mental guide you've given at the beginning, Wendy, was that if a good way to think about blockchain likely as a solution is when the client is looking for a multi-party need to exchange information between those parties that is going to be absolutely undisputably verifiably truth, that will have the added benefit of having both accountability and auditability embedded.
You're an expert now, Dalibor.
Those are the parameters, right?
You're united.
I am the knighted expert. Thank you very much. I want to be very respectful of your time. We are coming up on the hour. This was very, very informative. For the audience members, thank you all very much for your time and attention. We have recorded the session. I will send the recording, and we are almost at the end of our Tech Trends Deep Dives. In 2 weeks' time, please join us at the same channel at the same time. We are going to have a conversation on mainframe modernization under our 6th trend called Mainframe Mod Hits Its Stride. And Mike Bechtel is going to reappear, and we will be joined by Thorsten Bernecker, who is our global mainframe modernizations expert. But next week, if you decide to join us next Wednesday on the 29th, we'll have a conversation with Anu Doda. Anu is the head of engineering and the chief technology officer with Thomson Reuters. So that will be an interesting conversation about her career and her life. So please of course, register and join me. With that, Wendy, Charles, and Mike, I want to thank you very much for your wisdom and for your time. This was lovely.
It was great. Thank you
Thank
for having me.
us.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much. Have a lovely Wednesday.
Bye-bye.